Welcome to Werezilla's Retrospective. I'm your host, Werezilla. Now, I'm a big fan of Indiana Jones. Duh. But surprisingly, I haven't actually followed up on a lot of the series that followed in his wake. With one big exception. Naughty Dog's Uncharted series, which is what we're going to be talking about all June. This is Uncharted Month. Now, despite saying that I do enjoy this series, I'm going to say something a bit contradictory to that. Uncharted is its own worst enemy. Both fans and detractors of the series love and hate the games for pretty much the same reason. Its heavy, scripted action set pieces. The former argue that it makes for a more focused experience that emulates the action-adventure movies they are inspired by. The latter counter that with this question: then why isn't the Uncharted series movies instead of games? And the short answer is, Naughty Dog are a game studio, not a movie studio. But the long answer is one I hope to figure out by going through the main series. Although I must admit, when it comes to the first game, Drake's Fortune, it doesn't hold up quite as well as the rest of the series. Special thanks to Flip Art for helping me figure out how to work this Elgato thing so I can film my own footage for once. Now, better stop stalling, and let us begin. We open with our protagonist, fortune hunter Nathan Drake, and journalist Elena, uncovering the coffin of Nathan's ancestor, the real-life explorer Sir Francis Drake, discovering a journal that he left behind. A journal that reveals Francis Drake faked his death to continue his search for the city of Dorado. And it should go without saying that Nate here is played by Nolan North, who you may remember from everything. Now, despite mentioning Indiana Jones earlier, Nate makes it clear that while he may have a great knowledge of history, he's not a professor on a highly sanctioned adventure, but rather a self-interested fortune hunter. So I guess less Indiana Jones and more Lara Croft. As such, when pirates ambush him and Elena, they can't call the Panamanian authorities for help because they're there illegally.
Unless you want to end up in a Panamanian jail, we should probably handle this ourselves.
What's worse?
You obviously haven't been in a Panamanian jail.
A surprisingly lighthearted delivery given what we learn in Uncharted 4, but one game at a time. After the pirates destroy their boat, they get fished out of the sea by Nate's friend and mentor, Sully, who encourages Nate to leave Elena behind while they go after the treasure. Dick move, but this does lead to a rare moment in this game. A segment where we don't have to shoot our way through dozens of enemies as we travel through the jungle. Just as well, gives the game a chance to characterize these two, which is mostly consistent with their betrayals in later games, but again, we'll get to more about that later. They come upon a crashed German U-boat because this is an adventure series. Of course the Nazis are somehow involved, and Nate discovers El Dorado is not a city of gold, but rather a large statue. Now, before Nate went into the U-boat, he gave the journal to Sully for the sake of the plot. There was a swimming section before this, so I know he's not worried about it getting wet. Because afterwards, he and Sully are confronted by the game's villain, Roman. Boy, is he underwhelming. He's pretty much just a reason for there to be enemies to fight along the adventure and doesn't have much character beyond that. And that's a damn shame because he's voiced by Simon Templeman, who played a much more layered character in Dragon Age Origins. He shoots Sully, forcing Nate to run from his men. I don't know how Elena followed Nate, but she somehow did and is able to help him escape. For those keeping score, that's two contrivances fairly early in the plot. See, these games are very story-driven, but that doesn't always mean that they're excellently told. Nate and Elena follow the trail to a different island that doesn't look all that different from the one they were just on, and get shot down and separated. By the way, and I know this is a nitpick, but the film student in me can't help but notice Elena's camera doesn't look like it has nearly enough battery power to get enough footage for her producers if there's only 42 minutes of battery power left, right as they arrive on the island. We see later in the game it's dipped down to 29, but that's at the halfway point. I'm sorry, but that battery should be deader than some of the explorers Nate is following in the footsteps of. Okay, more relevant stuff. As much as I hate to say this, the following few levels made me really reconsider doing this video. Nate's trek through the jungle is filled with Roman's goons, and this leads to tons of shootouts. It's none of these segments are hard. I mean, the cover mechanics can get you killed more often than not, but it's just that there's so many of them. Nate, alone, with no one else to bounce his wit off, or even a change of scenery, fighting hundreds of mercenaries is tedious. At least the climbing sections are good. This eventually ends with Nate getting captured by one of Roman's lieutenants, a mercenary named Eddie, who the dialogue suggests Nate has a history with. Sadly, his overly excited, easily angered personality makes him more interesting than his boss, who, I remind you, played Logain 2 years later. He tempts Nate to join him, but Nate just ignores him, his tone giving me the impression that this has happened before. Or it's possible Nate is just self-aware enough to know Eddie doesn't have much leverage against him since Elena was not captured.
How much trouble could one girl be?
Well, come on!
Thank you. Hey!
The following truck fight is decent, but the one on a jet ski shortly afterwards is easily the worst part of the game. I can't shoot and drive at the same time, making me a sitting duck while there are explosive barrels that the enemies can blow up, but they're too high up to be damaged by these themselves, so this level can go straight to hell. Which, I'm guessing it did, since a segment like this never happens throughout the rest of the franchise. I guess Naughty Dog knows when they made a bad segment. In a reversal of what will happen later in the series, Nate wants to give up, but Elena is the one who wants to continue on since she still wants a story for her job. Of course, Nate is given more of an incentive to continue when Elena captures footage of a still-alive Sully entering a helicopter with Roman. Yeah, remember when Nate gave him Francis Drake's journal earlier for no reason? Turns out it was so he could survive getting shot. I wonder if that would work in real life. Well, I guess it's good this isn't the real world. Oh look, I can shoot locks off gates to open them. I wonder if that can be done in the real world. So our heroes reconcile with Sully, revealing that he was just leading Roman astray and was waiting for Nate to catch up. And catch up is an opt word, as every time Nate finds a secret area after solving some puzzle, Roman's men are already on the other side, ready for another gunfight. It doesn't even make sense as to how they keep appearing in these areas that require looking through Drake's journal, but we had just established Sully was misleading them, so obviously they didn't solve the puzzle and get in there themselves. Eventually, Nate overhears Roman and Eddie talking about how something is killing their men. Eddie did mention it earlier, but I assumed he was talking about the dozens of earlier gunfights. In truth, it's because the Dorado statue is cursed. Nate and Eddie end up being attacked by these things that look like Gollum from Lord of the Rings after hitting the gym. Now, I expected Eddie to become a reluctant ally at this point.
Jake, if we don't make it out of here, I just want you to know, I hate your guts.
Yeah, likewise, pal.
As the two fight off these things before Eddie falls to his death with two of them biting down on his throat. However, one of the best bits in the game come next when Nate and Elena come across the corpse of Sir Francis Drake, and Nate is heartbroken that the guy he respected so much died alone and never found the treasure. It's a good moment. He even tosses away the ring he's had around his neck throughout the game, which, again, when you learn more about it in Game 3, that tells you how much finding Francis Drake's corpse hurts him. Though the drama is somewhat ruined by the silliness of Francis Drake having run into a skeleton, yet his easily identifiable hairstyle and beard remained intact. Moving on, remember the German U-boat from earlier? Well, it wasn't the last we would see of the Nazis, as Nate and Elena end up in a Nazi facility. Here he learns more about the Dorado statue. Namely that Francis Drake did discover it, but then tried to hide it so it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands and was killed trying. Now, I fully expect for Nate to return only to find Elena captured by Roman's men. I was completely correct. Nate and Sully run off to Roman, where he finds the statue, which turns out to not be a statue, but rather a sarcophagus. The corpse inside infects Roman with a curse, and then this guy shoots him. Wait, what? Yeah, this guy? His name's Navarro, another one of Roman's lieutenants. And he's had about 10 lines before this scene and less screen time than any other character in the game. He'll be our final boss. He takes the sarcophagus onto his boat, which leads to the second worst segment in the game. It's here where the folks who say the Uncharted games shouldn't be games have some valid arguments. Logically, I should be able to just shoot at him, but instead Navarro just kills me instantly. What I'm supposed to do is shoot at his men, make him retreat further up the boat, dodge his shots, and then fight him in a QTE. I could just shoot him, but then we wouldn't have the final scene show this.
Adios, asshole.
Nate, Elena, and Sully escape the burning boat. Hey, bookends! With Sully having found some treasure off screen so they don't leave empty-handed. And no, I don't know where he got it. Elena returns Nate ring to him, and our heroes ride off into the sunset. Simple ending, but I guess it's fitting for a relatively simple game. If there's anything I can say about Uncharted Drake's Fortune, it's that it's an earnest attempt. And it shows. We established Nate, Elena, and Sully, got some good dialogue with each other, and gave us a feel as to what we should expect from this series. Climbing around, looking at good environments, lots of shooting, there's little treasures to collect in the area regardless of the linear levels, solving puzzles, well, okay, not really solving puzzles, since the answer is already written down in Francis Drake's journal, but at least there's some justification for it. In this game, anyway. One thing I'm glad did not return in later games is the 6-axis controls involved in holding the controllers steady while walking on logs. Thank God it's not in the remastered Nathan Drake collection on the PS4. Speaking of which, I'm not sure why the original PS3 version of the game didn't have trophies, making it the only PS3 game I've ever played where that wasn't the case. Speaking of things that began with this game, Uncharted has a funny habit of both being predictable, but also subverting expectations. And it tends to go back and forth as to whether or not that's a good or bad thing. The fact that the Dorado sarcophagus was cursed wasn't really a surprise if you've seen any other adventure movie. Really, it's just a matter of how the curse would manifest itself. I didn't mention this in the synopsis, but it wasn't exactly surprising Elena ended up losing her camera. The villains are as stock as you can get without resorting to Nazis, and even then they had some influence on the story. It's one of many adventure movie tropes that this game embraces, making it both predictable, and yet it's still able to surprise you. I imagine Navarro taking over as the final boss in the end, and possibly Eddie's death, was an attempt to subvert expectations, but since he was barely a character, there's not really any impact. What does have impact, of course, is that Sully doesn't end up betraying Nate given the circumstances of his survival. Uncharted has a habit of making it look like a character is going to die, only to take the player by surprise and have them live, while still having others who have dead written on their face, and then they go ahead and die exactly like you thought they would. Though I will say there is a bit of inconsistency with Sully's character in that he begins the game in debt and Nate has to get him out of trouble while the rest of the franchise paints him as the voice of reason. I mean, his behavior is mostly the same along with Nate and Elena's for that matter, but it's something most fans probably aren't used to when they go back to the first game. Same with the gameplay, most people are used to better aiming and being able to throw back enemy grenades. And what's to say about this game when I spend more time talking about what isn't in the first game that is in the sequels than was actually in the first game? Probably it's because I have fonder memories of the second game than the first, which I will elaborate more on next time.
Thought this kind of thing only happened in the movies.
Yeah, well, it still hurt like a son of a bitch, I'll tell you that.